In this lesson, we'll continue our discussion of epithelia by learning how we classify epithelia. There's basically two criteria in when you go to classify epithelia. I personally, when I look into a microscope, I look at the number of layers of cells that I see. I look at that first. Then I take a look at the shape of the cells. So very simple. Let's do the layers first. If there is just a single row of cells, right? It's just a single layer of cells sitting on a basement membrane. We're going to classify that as simple epithelium. Anytime there is two or more rows of cells or layers of cells, you're going to call that stratified. So let's go to one of these tables here that's pretty good. Up on the left-hand side, we see here, this is an example of simple epithelium, and then on the bottom are examples of stratified. So always look for the basement membrane first. You see the basement membrane right over here. Okay, and sitting on it is just one row of cells. Right, here's a cell right here, then we see part of a cell there, and a little bit of this one over here. Same thing here. Here's your basement membrane, like that. Let's just move my mouse over here. Basement membrane here, and then again one row of cells. Basement membrane, and then one row of cells. So all three examples here, this one, and this one, are examples of simple. At the bottom, again, look at the basement membrane. Now we have many rows of cells stacked up on one another. Many rows of cells. Well, actually two in this example here, and then in this example here we have 3 layers of cells. Nonetheless, whether there's 8 or 9 or 2 or 3, anytime there's cells stacked up on one another, we're going to call them stratified. Okay, so that's one of the first things you want to take a look at, simple or stratified. The next thing we look at is the shape, right? If the cell is like pancaked, like flat, we call that cell squamous. If it's box-like, or I put here square-shaped, we're going to use the word cuboidal. And if it's tall and slender, then we're going to use the word columnar. So if you take a look here at this one, this cell is like, it's like a pancake. We're kind of looking at it from the side. It's kind of flat. So this would be a squamous cell. This one is box-like, cuboidal. This one is tall and slender, columnar. So how do we put this all together? Here we go. If we have one row of flat cells, we would put this together as a simple squamous epithelium, right? Simple meaning one row, squamous meaning flat. Okay, so one row of flat cells. Over here, one row of box-like cells, simple cuboidal, and then one row of tall, slender cells, simple columnar. At the bottom, find your basement membrane. Again, you see many rows of cells, but take a look here, guys. Notice the cells here have a different shape from the cells up top. What we look at are the cells furthest away from the basement membrane. That determines the name of the epithelium that you're looking at. So since these top ones are flat, right, this is a side view, they're flat, this is going to be stratified squamous, right? Even though these ones along the basement membrane are not flat, don't let that throw you. We go by what's up top over here, the ones furthest away from the basement membrane. All right, so this is an example of stratified squamous. This one's going to be a stratified cuboidal. This one's pretty easy, right? Basement membrane, and then 2 layers of box-like cells. The third one, basement membrane, again, 1 row, 2 row, 3 rows, but again, they all look different, right? The cells at the bottom look different from the cells up over here. Again, the rule is go by the cells furthest away from the basement membrane. So here's our basement membrane. Here's the cells furthest away. Right? Since they're tall and slender, stratified columnar. Okay, so that's how you kind of make that determination when you're looking at the microscope. So now that we have that basic information, let's take a look at some of the different epithelia that we had on that previous table. Let's start by looking at the simple epithelial first. Let's start with the simple squamous epithelium. So generally, guys, these are again one layer of flat cells So we see them in places where there's going to be absorption and diffusion, right? These cells are involved with, absorbing things, or maybe they're allowing a diffusion of things through the cells, like maybe blood gases, that type of thing. So where do we find them? We find simple squamous. That's the membrane lining the body cavity. It's known as the mesothelium, right? The mesothelium are the membranes that line our body cavities. So if you remember from previous lessons, the pleura, the pericardium, the peritoneum. These are all the membranes that line the body cavities. Right? We collectively call them mesothelium. And guess what? Those cells, if you were to, these linings, if you were to look at them under the microscope, are simple squamous epithelium. The endothelium, this is something that you see a lot in AMP2. These are the simple squamous epithelium that line the chambers of the heart, like the atria and the ventricles that you're going to learn. And then all of our blood vessels, right? So all of our blood vessels have a single layer of cells lining it. That's known as the endothelium. And same thing, the chambers of the heart. Our air sacs, the alveoli, where gas exchange takes place in the lung and the blood vessels, right? Carbon dioxide goes out of the bloodstream into the alveoli, and we breathe that out, and then oxygen in the alveoli go into the bloodstream, right? So the blood gases actually cross the simple squamous epithelium, and then even the inner lining of our cornea, which is the part of the eye. So these are the places that we see our simple squamous epithelium. All right, so this is just kind of a photograph. I have a couple photographs showing, again, the locations that I just went over. The mesothelia, again, include the pleura, the pericardium, and the peritoneum. Right, the endothelium we just mentioned is going to line the heart and the blood vessels. I didn't put this in the previous slide, but even portions of the kidney tubule, the inner lining of the cornea, and again, the alveoli. Now, this is a bird's eye view of simple squamous epithelium. These are things you would see in the lab. This is not a side view. And how do I know that? There's no basement membrane. We're looking down, kind of on the tops of the simple squamous epithelium. It would be like this. It would be like a bird's eye view down, like this, kind of looking down on the cell, not a side view. Okay, and this is what it looks like under the microscope. You can see all the cells are connected together. Kind of reminds me like of a ceramic floor, that type of thing. Each one of these would be like a tile. Now, here's from just another book. You can see again same type of thing. You can see just the cell. This one's a bird's eye view. Again, I know that because there's no basement membrane. This one is more of a side view, right? Kind of a side view. This is where the basement membrane would be right here. And then each one of these blue cells represents a simple squamous cell from the side. Right? So all of these are simple squamous cells from the side. Right? And then here's just another perspective. You can kind of see kind of almost like a side and top view, right? Basement membrane. Right? And then we can see the cell from the side here, but we could also see the cell from the top over here. So it's kind of giving us a little bit of both. Okay, so that was the simple squamous epithelium. The next squamous epithelium we want to look at is stratified squamous. So as far as the function, as a general rule, guys, anytime you hear stratified, think protection, right? Having multiple layers of cells, believe it or not, is protective. So stratified squamous you're going to find in body parts where there's a potential for mechanical stress or friction, that type of thing. So it's going to protect against mechanical stress. And then in the skin, we actually have a special protein known as keratin that also provides extra strength, but this is the protein that makes us water resistant, right? So not all stratified squamous has keratin, right? That's specifically in the skin. And these are some of the locations that you would have stratified squamous. So I put there first the skin, right? If you know the top part of the skin, the most superficial part of the skin is known as the epidermis. That would be the layer that actually has keratin. The remaining areas there do not have keratin. The mouth, right? The oral cavity, the pharynx, which is your throat, esophagus, vagina, vaginal canal, rectum, anus, all of these areas are going to have stratified squamous. So again, I listed everything out on my previous slide there here also. And again, typically the function is going to be protection. So again, when you look here, this is a section from the mouth, right? So you can see the oral cavity here. So again, you can see the basement membrane. Right, underneath its connective tissue, and then you have layers and layers of cells, right? All these layers of cells, and then the cells that are at the the furthest away from the basement membrane, right? The more superficial ones, they're flat, so this would be stratified squamous. Right, here's the actual micrograph. Again, the basement membrane would be here. And again, you can see the cells here, they're more rounded, various shapes, but look at the ones up top, right? They're going to be all flat, right? Stratified squamous. Just another perspective. This is actually from the vaginal canal right over here. So same thing, you can see the basement membrane would be like right here. The red underneath it would be connective tissue. Now you always have, we'll learn this in a subsequent lesson, connective tissue is always under the basement membrane. But then look at this, guys, all these layers of cells. This is a really good micrograph. All these layers of cells stacked up on one another. And then again, see how they're getting flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter. And then this would be the very superficial part of the epithelium, right? And this would be the lumen of the vaginal canal, right? That would be the hollow part of the vaginal canal right over here, right? Again, just a different perspective. This is the basement membrane here, and then again you can just see the cells stacked up on the many layers. But look at here, as you get higher up, right, further away from the basement membrane, flat, right? Okay, so that's our stratified squamous. Let's take a look at the cuboidals. So again, the cuboidals are the box-like cells. We'll do the simple cuboidal first. Similar to the squamous epithelium, these are also involved with absorption. We see them in parts of the body where things are being absorbed or even secreted, right? Things being released from the organ. So as you go on in your function, as you go on in your studies, I should say, you'll study these places where this takes place. But two examples I want you to know for this semester are the thyroid gland and our kidney tubules where we make urine. There's a structure called the nephron. So the kidney tubules of the nephron are lined by a simple cuboidal. And then you're going to see for AMP2 in the thyroid gland, there's something known as the thyroid follicle. They are also made up of simple cuboidal epithelium. So let's take a look. So here's an example. We have the kidney right over here. And this structure right here is a microscopic structure. It's known as the nephron, right? You'll study this in AMP2. So what they did was they took a small section of the nephron right here and they blew it up, right? So this would be like the tube here where, what we call filtrate. This is where the urine would be flowing right here. And notice, here's your basement membrane, guys. Underneath it is always connective tissue. And then you have one layer of, look at these beautiful box-like cells, big nuclei. They're so easy to see on the microscope. Okay, so this whole tube is made up of one layer of cube-like cells. Right, here's the actual micrograph. Again, basement membrane would be right about there. Connective tissue underneath. Right, and then look at this beautiful one layer of cube cells. And then again, this would be the hollow part right over here. Okay, so this is an actual micrograph of the diagram that they just have over here on the left. Right, the thyroid gland would have, again, the same types of cells. You take a look at those under the microscope in Anatomy and Physiology 2. All right, just from another book. This is from the kidney. This is a cross section of a kidney tubule. So the urine would flow in here, and then all around here, see these simple one layer box-like cells, right? And then they blew this up, and you can see again the one layer of box-like cells here. Okay, again, another perspective, basement membrane, connective tissue is always under the basement membrane, and then again, one layer of box-like cells sitting on that basement membrane. There's another type of cuboidal known as stratified cuboidal. I put it down here. It's relatively rare in the body. We see them in some of the ducts of glands, like a sweat gland. So you don't really see them too much in the body, but they're also involved with protection. Again, anytime you see stratified, think protection. They do some absorption and some secretion also. So just to kind of give you an idea, here's an example of the skin. You can see there's a sweat gland, right? This is the duct work of the sweat gland, right? And then here's the duct bringing the sweat out of the skin. onto the surface of the skin. So if we were to magnify these ducts down here, it would look something like this. Let's take a look at this one. So this would be the hollow part of the duct right here. And then if you follow my cursor right here, one layer of box-like cells, and then just outside of it, another layer right there. So since there's two layers in this example of box-like cells around the hollow part, which is the lumen of the duct, this is known as stratified cuboidal. Excuse me. Right, so here again, you can see the hollow part of the duct here, guys, and then again one layer of cube cells, and then outside of it another layer of cube cells. Okay, stratified cuboidal. Now, the next epithelium is not squamous, it's not cuboidal. This is called transitional epithelium. One of the things about transitional epithelium, these cells are able to stretch and change their shape without being damaged based on the stretching of an organ. Right? So these tolerate repeated cycles of stretching without damage, but their appearance does change as the organ stretches and then returns back to normal. Perfect example is our urinary bladder. Right behind our pubic bone is the bladder where we store urine. Throughout the day, if you think about it, right, if you empty your bladder, the bladder's empty, it's going to have a certain shape to the bladder, but over the next couple hours as the bladder fills, it's going to stretch. Well, the cells on the inside of the bladder are going to change their shape based on the stretching. Then when you go to the bathroom, right, you void again, you empty the bladder goes back to its original shape. The cells return to their original shape. And then the other place are the ureters. These are the tubes that connect the kidney to the bladder. They also have transitional epithelium. So let's take a look. Here's an example of the urinary bladder, right? We can see this is actually a male urinary bladder because this is the prostate gland right over here. And so we happen to know this is a male. And the bladder in this point is empty, right? So there's no urine in here, and the bladder has a certain size to it. So the cells that line the inside of the bladder would look like this. Here's your basement membrane. Again, underneath it is always connective tissue. And then you're going to have multiple layers of cells. And notice, guys, the cells are a variety of shape. But look at the cells that actually are lining the hollow part of the organ. This is the hollow part of the organ here where the urine is going to eventually accumulate. Look how big and round these are. These cells are actually called dome cells. You don't need to know that from me in this course, but they call them dome cells because they look like the dome of a building, right? The top part of a building that's round. And that's what the cells would all look like if the bladder was empty, right? And here it is on a regular micrograph. You can see nice dome cells up over here. Now, over the course of hours, the bladder will fill, and you can see the bladder now is bigger and it's stretched. So as the bladder is stretched, watch what happens. The cells, they flatten out, and even the number of rows kind of diminish a little bit. And the example I always give is if you took like a big, like, thick kind of rubber band, and when the rubber band is relaxed, it has a certain thickness to it. But then when you stretch the rubber band out, right, can you kind of picture it thinning out in the middle? Well, that's what's happening here. The cells are thinning out, and then when you let go of the rubber band, it goes to being thick again. Well, when you empty the bladder, they go back to being thick. So these are what we call transitional cells, right? They change their shape from when the bladder is empty to when the bladder is full. Right? And the two organs I'd like you to know are the urinary bladder and the ureters. The renal pelvis is a part of the inside the kidney. Don't worry about that too much. Just know the bladder and the ureters. Again, the ureters are the tubes that connect the kidney to the bladder. They're the tubes that bring the urine down to the bladder. All right, again, this is just from another textbook. Again, basement membrane. Multiple layers of cells, a variety of shapes. And again, the big cells on the top here, those rounded ones, right? I call them dome cells, right? This is the bladder when it's empty, right? And you can see them here. Okay, let's take a look at columnar epithelium now. So columnar epithelium are the tall, slender epithelium, right? We have both simple columnar, we have stratified columnar, and then there's a third one called pseudo stratified, right? So there's actually three that we're going to take a look at. So simple columnar, again, is going to be one layer of tall, slender cells. They do some limited protection. They do absorption and secretion. It's pretty much simple epithelium, always do kind of like absorption and secretion. This cell is one of the main cells of the digestive system. Right? We see these cells lining the inside of the stomach, small intestine, large intestine. So in A&P2, when you study the digestive system, right, this is where you're going to see these cells predominantly. We also see that in the gallbladder, and then in the female, the fallopian tubes or the uterine tubes, they're also lined by simple columnar epithelium. Right, so I have it all listed out over here also. So let's take a look just one more time. Basement membrane, right? Always look for connective tissue underneath, and then one layer, right? One row of cells, all lined up nicely, simple columnar. This happens to be from, looks like his intestine that they took this from, right? From the intestine, yeah, here it is, from the intestine down over here. So you can see that there. So since it's coming from the intestine, you can see also there's microvilli, right? Microvilli, if you remember from previous lessons, are involved with absorption. So we're absorbing more nutrients. If this was from the fallopian tube, right, the cells here would look the same, but instead of being microvilli up top, the fallopian tube cells have cilia, which help to move the egg down towards the uterus. So these things here would then, in the fallopian tube, would actually be cilia, not microvilli. And so depending on in the organ, will determine whether you have microvilli or cilia up top. Again, just from another book. Look for your basement membrane, right, underneath connective tissue. So now you know you're looking at a side view. And then again, one layer of just tall, slender cells. You can see the nuclei are all kind of lined up pretty much in the middle. Right, here's an example as far as a diagram. Right, one layer of tall, slender cells. And again, this is also from the small intestine. Okay, so the next epithelium you want to look at is called a pseudo-stratified columnar, right? So we're still looking at columnar epithelium. So when you look at this, these cells, or this epithelium, when you look at it under the microscope, it looks like the cells are stacked up on one another. So we would say it's stratified. But when you dissect it out, it turns out all of the cells are actually touching the basement membrane. So if all the cells are touching the basement membrane, it's really simple, but the appearance looks stratified. So they decided to call it a pseudo stratified, pseudo meaning false, right? It's a false stratification. And I'll show you what I mean by that on the picture. Typically, these cells have the cilia, which are for moving things. And that's because we typically find this in the respiratory organs. This is one of the main cells of the respiratory system. So again, in A&P2, when you're looking at the respiratory system, this is an epithelium that you'll revisit, right? So we find it lining the nasal cavity, the trachea, which is our windpipe, right? The tubes inside the lung, all the bronchi, right? These are going to be lined by pseudo-stratified columnar, right? So they involve with protection, and they do secrete mucus, right? They're actually important for mucus. This helps to kind of catch any debris or dust that we may breathe in. And as I said before, these cells typically have cilia, and the cilia will help to move that mucus so things don't settle down in the lower part of our lungs. The cilia will move things up so that we can cough it out and get rid of it. So let's take a look. So notice, guys, here's your basement membrane. Underneath it, connective tissue. And then you have layers and layers of cells, it looks like, right? Here's a row of nuclei here, right? Another row of nuclei here, some more nuclei up here, all these nuclei up here. So you would say when you look in the microscope, oh yeah, these are stratified. But when you dissect it out, every one of these cells is actually touching the basement membrane, right? If they're all touching the basement membrane, they cannot be stacked on one another, right? So they just kind of like overlap each other so that it looks like this it's stratified, okay? And then you can see nicely here would be the cilia. Right, so this is actually from the trachea, basement membrane. And then again, you can just see the nuclei kind of staggered and stacked on one another, right? So it looks stratified. And then here's the cilia right here. So this is again a microscope slide or tissue that you're going to see in your A&P2 classes. Right, same thing from a different textbook. Again, multiple layers of cells. It looks like, right, but it's not. Right, it's the nuclei look staggered, but the cells are actually all next to one another. And then here's some cilia right up top. And again, you can see from a diagram, basement membrane. Again, some cells are making it all the way to the apical surface, but other ones are being kind of covered up, like over here, down over here. Right, but all of these cells are touching the basement membrane. Okay, the last epithelium that's columnar is stratified columnar. This is also relatively rare in the body. Again, since it's stratified, they're involved with protection. So they're found in small areas, right? Small areas of the throat, the pharynx, some salivary gland ducts. Salivary gland ducts are involved with making saliva. Mammary glands, right in the breast, the urethra, and the anal area. So since again, since it's stratified, it's involved with protection. So you can see here, here's one of the parts of her. This is called the parotid gland. It's one of the salivary glands. You don't need to know the name of the gland right now. But what they did was they took part of that gland, and you can see this is where the saliva would flow. Right, this is kind of like the duct of the hollow part of the gland, and then you can see on each side there's a basement membrane on this side of the duct, and on this side also over here. And then again, look, right? One, two, three layers of cells, right? The cells that are furthest away from the basement membrane, however, are columnar, right? On this side, same thing. Basement membrane, right? Row one, two, three rows of cells. And again, the cells that are furthest away from the basement membrane are columnar, right? So this would be stratified columnar. As I mentioned, these are relatively rare in the body, right? They're just in small areas of those organs. So that's how we classify epithelium. Right? So we kind of reviewed simple and stratified, and then the different shapes, and then we kind of put it together and we looked at the various epithelial tissue.